So this is a little bit of a disclaimer. This video is quite short, and it really is almost more of a musicology background than it is a theory video. Um, I know that you can read the handout yourself, and you're very welcome to just do that. Or you could put me on 1.5 speed and buzz through this in a couple of minutes. This is more an overview of a musical era and trend and aesthetic than anything else. So buckle up, it'll just be a couple minutes and we'll get you set up for the piece that we will be listening to and learning about this week. Hi everyone and welcome to Unit 3. Unit 3 is a little bit of a miscellaneous unit of sorts. We are going to be exploring all kinds of different ways that we can navigate time and pitch and space, but there's no real sort of continued trajectory of the unit. It's going to seem like we're jumping all over the place, and that's because we kind of are. So this week, we are going to take a dive into a topic called indeterminacy. Now, you'll sometimes see this referred to as aleatoric music. They are basically synonymous, but it's a method of composition where some aspects of the music are left either up to chance or up to the performer's own interpretation. We can think of indeterminate music as occurring on a kind of a continuum from most to least composer control. Now, some aleatoric music is incredibly structured, but the key is that there's always got to be one element that is left entirely up to chance, entirely out of the composer's hands. Now, with some indeterminacy, the composer uses processes of chance to create the score, and the score is sort of unmalleable. The score becomes the object, and it remains the same forevermore for every performance. The indeterminacy part comes in the composition itself. So, as an example, I have here John Cage. He composed a piece called Music of Changes that he composed exclusively by consulting hexagrams from a translated Chinese text. And these hexagrams, they determined every single aspect of the music, the rhythm, the pitch, the dynamics, anything you can think of about this score was determined by Cage consulting these hexagrams. Now, once the score was made, though, the score was done. And so the performances all are off of the same exact score. The chance part was the compositional process itself. So there is actually a little bit of history to compositions like that. In the 18th century, Johannes Kernberger created these dice games. They were intended for the parlor, just when people like got together and hung out. At that time, usually in the upper middle class to upper class, people were amateur musicians. So chances are you would have someone in your circle of friends who could hack at a piano or a violin relatively competently. So Kernberger made these dice games, and you would get a little bit of a chart, and you would literally just roll a pair of dice 8 or 16 or 24 times, and every roll you would consult this chart, and each cell on the chart would correspond to a measure of music, and you would jot the music down, and by the end you would have an 8 or 16 or 24 bar phrase. And then you would play it, and it would sound good. Like, it would sound decent, passable. What you didn't know is that Kernberger very specifically created this chart so that the music would follow a similar trajectory every time. So say you were in G major, he constructed the chart so that all of your first couple of rolls would give you something that outlined G major. And then you would move maybe to the predominant, the 4, and get some C major noodling for a couple of rolls. And then you would move to the dominant. Maybe if it was really fancy, you'd have a 5 somewhere around like measure 5. And then cadence out in measures 7 and 8 to return to the dominant. So the chart itself was constructed very, very carefully, but it seemed like you were just rolling dice, and lo and behold, you got a piece of music that sounded pretty good for 18th century classical music. So that's an instance of a pretty high level of control that is relatively kind of shrouded in the illusion of chance. Now, kind of a bit on the other end of the spectrum, there are other indeterminate pieces that involve chance elements within the performance. This week, we're going to look at a piece by Terry Riley, and it's called In C. You're going to see it's in your course pack. The score itself looks quite normal. It's a 53, I think, measure score. And the pitches and the rhythms are all given to the performers, but the ensemble gets to decide on things like how many times to play each pattern, what dynamics to use, even really what tempo to use. The ensemble itself is left up to chance, so you could hear various performances of this piece with different timbres every time. Then you have pieces by composers like Stockhausen and a composer named Earl Brown that actually allow performers to determine the order of movements and sometimes even the order of measures. So the score in that instance is less determined. It's a little more flexible, and the performer gets to make conscious choice that can really significantly impact the performance of the piece. Now, one last category of indeterminate music is one that uses graphic or just non-conventional notations. So what you're looking at is a piece called Music for Electronic Metronome. And as you can see, this is not a standard score, right? There are no staff lines, there are no note heads, there are no bar lines. It kind of looks more like a treasure map. And the performer is left to interpret and navigate this score. Now, I'm sure you can imagine then that you are going to get wildly different performances of this piece, because since the score is so non-traditional, there are going to be a whole host of interpretations of the notation itself. One important thing to keep in mind with this is that to some degree, all music is indeterminate music. And some of you might have even been thinking that as I was talking through some of the elements on the first page. While the score is considered kind of the expression, the determination of a piece, we already know that no two performances are alike. And we often use performance comparison in theory class to discuss different interpretations of the same exact notated score. No matter how precisely a conductor or a performer adhere to every bit of notation on the page, there are always going to be variations in outcome, intentional or not. And a lot of that is a result of the fact that music making in every aspect, the composing, the editing, the performing, even the listening, it all comes down to the fact that it is all done by fallible and unpredictable human beings. So every piece of music is indeterminate unintentionally by the very nature of the fact that humans are involved in the production of it. But as we go into this week, I do want you to keep in mind some particular kind of questions or considerations, and this is also especially geared towards, I know you just handed in your Unit 2 capstone project and you don't want to hear about another one, but you do have one left. And a lot of you have been composing for your capstones and it's been so fun. And I would like to continue that trend and give you some ideas for some of you who might want to try out this kind of indeterminate aleatoric composition of sorts. But some things to keep in mind, and through this week as we're studying in C, what do composers gain from creating aleatoric music? Does it kind of let them off the hook to some degree? Or is it a really kind of difficult conscious choice to relinquish some control here or there? And also, because most of you, or probably all of you, are performers to some degree, what do you as performers gain from learning and performing this type of music? We'll see with the Terry Riley piece this week that there's a lot of real musicality that goes into these pieces. It's not just kind of buckshot, do whatever you want and hope it comes out okay. There is some real technical prowess and musical thought that goes into these types of pieces. And this idea of, does music need some sort of structure to be musical? And this whole idea of what is musicality to begin with. Is structure a necessary piece of that? And then kind of the big question, especially thinking ahead to your capstone, if you were composing indeterminate music, what elements would you want to keep control over? And what elements would you be willing to kind of toss and say, okay, I'm going to leave this either up to chance or up to the performers or maybe both, and just see what happens?